Hello and welcome back to Flint Hills Briar. I'm Gareth. And this is my weird story. So obviously the story's been with me for a couple of years now anyway. Wasn't really sure if I wanted to tell it or not in this format on my channel here. But recently I just kind of got inspired by seeing something kind of similar. Not that the story was similar, but it was kind of a similar sort of video. So, or actually a couple of videos from a couple of different folks in the YTPC. So I kind of decided it inspired me to share my story. So anyway, here it is. Forgive me for reading because this story is, as you will see, is pretty convoluted, and I figured out quite a while back that the best way for me to share this, because I've told this story to multiple people, pretty much never having written it out, and just the best way for me to tell it, to get from point A to point B without wandering off course too much, is just to have it written down, and we'll go from there. So forgive me for reading, but I basically have a script I'm just going to read this off of. So, all right, here's my weird story. Okay, my video about the New Mexico Sasquatches. Oh yeah, before I go any further, sorry. I'm enjoying some Dan Tobacco's Devil's Holiday in this Missouri Meerschaum hardwood maple, which apparently is not made out of maple. I read somewhere these are basically all like made out of birch, and I guess they just stain them differently, even though this one's not stained, but kind of seems like Devil's Holiday. People either like it or they hate it. I love black currants, so I think it's quite good. But anyway, here we go. Yeah, so my video about the New Mexico Sasquatches was completely true, but it was obviously a joke. Those weren't Sasquatches. Those were two people in a tent in the campsite next to ours. This story is true in every way. Take it for what you will. I'm still not sure what I really think of it. Forgive me for reading a script for this video. As you will see, the story is a convoluted mess, and having written it out beforehand is the best way that I can tell the story, get from point A to point B, and hopefully not get lost in the middle and drift off course. Honestly, I couldn't care less if anyone believes this story. But as you will see, I don't think that anyone would even try to make up such a convoluted mess of a story. I don't know what to make of this story, such as it is. It has to be one of the overall strangest things that has happened to me. Simply put, the story is a mess to tell. It's a number of different events, which alone mean almost nothing. What makes the sum of these events strange is how they came together in my life over the course of a week or so. I would say that I'm a standard Orthodox Catholic, believing in the teachings of the church and being guided, naturally speaking, by science. And science says that my pipe isn't lit anymore, so I'm just going to add some heat to that. I can't say that I've ever had any reason to actually believe in the existence of fairies, gnomes, little people, fae folk, etc. Okay, so in February of 2021, I was getting excited about an upcoming camping trip in the snow and cold weather conditions that we had been experiencing. Temperatures in the single digits and down to 0 Fahrenheit. I have a number of winter camping books, And I was looking through one in order to find some good meal ideas. As I was paging through a book called Winter Camping, written by Bob Carey, from up in Ely, Minnesota, I came to a page where there was a cartoonish drawing of some sort of rather jolly-looking creatures. I was aware of the Nessa or Tomtons, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, of Norwegian and Swedish folklore, and how you are traditionally supposed to warn such creatures, these are like little gnomes basically, how you're supposed to warn such creatures to move out of the way underneath the snow before you relieve yourself in winter in the winter outdoors. That way you don't pee on them and make them mad. I just sort of assumed that the creatures in the book were somehow related to these creatures. There was a caption to the picture, which I only half read before turning the page. It was some long word that didn't register to me. It started with an M, and it may have seemed to be some sort of Indian or Native American term. And I'm probably going to have to give up even try to keep this pipe lit as I'm reading. So later that week, the weekend finally arrived, and I found myself camping alone out at one of my favorite lakes for winter camping. And actually, I was in this campsite right here. The temperatures during the day were only in the single digits, and the lake had more than 4 inches of ice on it. Around midday, I decided to go ice fishing. As I was sitting at my ice hole in a vain attempt to catch something out on this lake here, I became aware of a strange sound. At first, I thought that it sounded like somebody was using a weed eater, string trimmer, a good distance away, like, a mile or two away. Something that would have been odd behavior on that cold and snow-covered day. I then realized that the sound seemed to be coming from an area of trees a bit above the lake shore, where the ground rose from the lake as it was a hillside. The shore was only maybe 25 yards away from my ice hole. The sound had an odd buzzing / whirring sound to it. I am 100% sure that I heard the sound, and that it sounded like it was coming from the tree-covered slope a bit above the lake shore. I sat there looking at where the sound was coming from, trying to figure out what could be making it. More than anything, it almost sounded like it was being made by a large insect or a swarm of insects. As it was very cold, no warmer than maybe 8 degrees Fahrenheit, above zero, I knew that it couldn't be made by an insect. It also didn't sound like the sort of sound any animal I knew of could make. And I spend a good deal of time outdoors, and I've heard a lot of animals make plenty of odd, sometimes even scary sounds. The sound possibly could have been made by a drone in flight, but I looked above the trees several times and saw nothing in the air. The trees were also too thick for a drone to have flown amongst them. Eventually, I just decided that I wasn't going to be able to figure out what was making that strange sound, and I stopped paying attention to it. Eventually, the sound must have just stopped. And I later discovered that around the time I heard the sound, somebody had driven a vehicle, a truck, back on a road that was in a straight line behind where I had heard the sound, but at a bit of distance. I don't know what the occupants of the vehicle did, but there were some tire tracks. I found this out later because I walked back there after this experience. There were some tire tracks and some boot prints in the snow that seemed to indicate that they stopped the vehicle and got out. And I think it was a dad and his son, because I saw them come out and they went over on the other side of the lake while I was still at my ice hole. However, there were not very many footprints around this spot, indicating that they had been there and kind of wandered around for very long. Because of this, I can't rule out the possibility that somebody may have flown a drone back behind this sound emanating area where I was hearing this weird sound. But the spot was where I heard the sound coming from. And I, scanned the sky more than once, and I saw nothing. So can't eliminate the possibility that there was a drone flown, but I never saw one, and I was looking for one, looking around. So, heard this weird sound on this frozen lake. About a week later, I had a day off from work, and the weather was still cold, so I decided to go to a different lake a bit closer to where I live and do a bit more ice fishing. This lake was more than an hour's drive away from this one here, where I'd heard the strange buzzing sound coming from the treed lake shore. As I was sitting over my ice hole at the second lake, I was listening to John Keel's book, The Eighth Tower, on Audible. As many people know, at least among certain circles, John Keel wrote a book called The Mothman Prophecies. And this Eighth Tower book is also a book about UFOs and other odd paranormal stuff. It's just about as far away from a nature book, in my opinion, as you can get. So while I was out on the ice, a group of Canada geese flew overhead. And geese in flight always get me to think of the book A Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold, which is a classic of nature/conservation literature. And as I thought about Leopold's book, because he talks about, it kind of goes through the year, and in one part he talks about like the geese coming in or flying out for spring or fall or whatever. So as I thought about Leopold's book, it reminded me of how an acquaintance of mine that was from Wisconsin, Leopold lived in Wisconsin, once told me that if I liked Aldo Leopold's work, I should read some of Sigrid Olson's books. And Olson also lived near Ely, Minnesota, just like Bob Carey, the guy that wrote the one book, the winter camping book. Yeah, Olson wrote several nature-centered books about the northern U.S. and Canadian wilderness and canoe country. After this brief mental sidetrack, I quickly returned my attention to Keel's audiobook that was still playing. Within 1 to 2 minutes, John Keel, in his book, related a quote from one of Sigrid Olson's books about a Cree Indian folk creature called the Memegishi. Now, these creatures, they have different names among different tribes. I'm probably not pronouncing it right. The spellings there's many different spellings, but I'm just going to call them the Memegishi. And these are small creatures that, in the book, in John Keel's book, he talks about how Sigrid Olson was saying that the Memegishi were small creatures that live between rocks and rapids and who like to capsize canoes. I was immediately gobsmacked by the coincidence or synchronicity of thinking about Olson, who was a very niche writer, not widely known among the vast majority of people. I mean, I doubt most of you have ever heard of him. And frankly, probably nearly completely unknown to those outside of the canoe country, Northwoods, back boundary waters, community, people interested in it. And then hearing John Keel quote him by name, that was just kind of out of middle of nowhere. I never would have expected hearing John Keel quote Sigrid Olson, who I just thought of like a minute or two before. So to me, this coincidence was extremely uncanny. It felt as if a number of factors had somehow combined to lead me to somehow this seemingly meaningful coincidence or synchronicity. I had no idea what it meant, and I didn't have a clue as to what these Memegishi were. But again, I just had to file away the strangeness of this occurrence and just go on with my ice fishing business. And I need to go on with the business of tamping this devil's holiday down and relighting. There we go. So, about 3 or 4 days later, one night while I was at home, I started thinking about the odd coincidence / synchronicity of hearing John Keel's out of the blue reference to Sigurd Olsen. Right after I had just totally randomly thought about Olsen. I wondered what these Memegishi were. Just then I remembered those funny looking creatures in the winter camping book and the odd one-word caption that seemed to start with an M. So I retrieved the book, I flipped to that picture. And the caption read, Mannegishi. And like I said, I've since discovered that the spelling of these creatures varies quite considerably from Native American or First Nations tribe to tribe. So the next day I spent a little time researching these Memegishi, and I learned that many tribes from the northern US and Canada have stories about these creatures, these small folk. And what they look like, where they live, what they do, etc., varies from tribe to tribe. Again, as does the spelling of their name. And of course, with the spelling, you're taking these Native American languages and trying to write it out in Roman alphabet letters. So obviously that's probably going to lead to some differences in spelling. So as I was reading, I discovered that one tribe holds that these, and it's going to start raining. And at least it's sleet. I guess I'll keep reading because I'm not going to get wet. Maybe I'm going to hunker it underneath my tarp here a little bit better, so I'll be right back. All right, and we're back. Of course, I lost my place. Okay. As I was reading, I discovered that one tribe holds that these Memegishi live in riverbanks and make a buzzing sound that sounds like dragonflies. Trying to turn the page with cold fingers. Again, I was just gobsmacked all over again. This description seemingly matched the experience that I had hearing the odd buzzing sound above the lake shore while I was out ice fishing. So, all that weird stuff kind of came together in the weird way that it did, and it really made me wonder what the heck was up with all that. So, about a month after these winter camping and ice fishing occurrences, I was listening to an episode of a podcast called Astonishing Legends that had recently been released. And it was actually while I was driving out to a campsite. And it was episode 204. The Nain Rouge was the title. That's French. And so a few weeks before this podcast had been released, because this whole thing struck me as weird as it did, and I'd been listening to this podcast, and I just kind of felt like relaying the story to somebody, some people that might, I don't know, have some sort of interest in it. I just kind of felt like I needed to tell somebody, sort of thing. So I sent a email to the Astonishing Legends folks, Scott and Forrest and company, and just kind of looking for maybe any input that anybody had or whatever, what they might have thought about it. And of course, they're too busy with emails and stuff. I never heard anything back anyway. But so I sent this email. Okay, partway through listening to this Nain Rouge episode, Scott and Forrest said that they were going to share an email that they had recently received from a listener describing their experience running across a small Native American / First Nations folk creature. So I'm hearing this, and I was about 98% sure that they're going to read my email, because they said that they recently got an email, and it was from somebody who just started listening to the show not too long ago, because I'd only been listening to it for, I don't know, probably less than 5 or 6 months at that point in time. So they start reading this email, and it wasn't from me. It was from a First Nations guy, Canadian, I think, so I say that. Because up there, they're First Nations people, and down here we tend to call them Native Americans. You know, forgive my ignorance on all that, but his name was Bucky, and Bucky related the time that as a child he went fishing with his dad, and after they didn't catch anything and the sun was setting, they were walking out of the woods when he saw a small, hairy creature quickly walk across his path. And I guess the next day he told this story to his grandmother, and she told him that it was good that he had seen that creature, because those creatures helped children, and they were seen as just kind of a good thing to see. And she also said that his uncle used to play with these creatures down like by the river when he was a kid. And she said that like she didn't really believe his uncle, so she went down there where he said he had played with these creatures, and she said there's like this like little miniature like fire ring or something down there. So I guess she believed that there was actually something there. But Bucky didn't give a name in this email for these creatures, or at least they didn't read it. But the description of them and the actions of these creatures, at least in one tribe's tradition, would lead me to be almost certain that he was talking about the Memegeshi. I'd be about 98% sure that he was referring to the Memegeshi. So, yeah. So even after I had this weird run-in with these creatures that I had never heard of before, that almost seemed like for some reason something was trying to make me pay attention to them, be aware of them, and then like a month after the fact, I'm listening to this podcast and they read this email from this guy that's talking about these same creatures. Yeah, I don't know what to think about that, but I have to admit that ever since that time, I have had no more run-ins of whatever sort with the Memegeshi. So there it is. One thing that may be kind of interesting to note is that some of the tribes some of the Native American First Nations tribes have traditions to where you want, in order to garner favors from or show your goodwill towards the Memegeshi, they believe that you should leave them little offerings of like tobacco, maybe other stuff, but I know tobacco is one of the notable ones. Some people say the Memegeshi will, like if you leave your crap laying around while you're out camping in the snow, they'll make it disappear. Although I think usually that just comes down to you dropping your stuff in your snow and you don't find it again. So you have to be careful about that. But anyway, that is my weird story of my encounter with whatever. Maybe encounter with nothing whatsoever. But that's the Memegishi and me, I guess. So I'll leave that for your consideration. I don't know what I'm considering it still. Thanks for joining me for this weird story. I'm Gareth with Flint Hills Briar. I'll see you next time.